I was a new nurse at an old hospital and had only been working there for a couple of months. The hospital, with its creaky floors and dimly lit corridors, always gave me a sense of unease. But I was determined to prove myself as a competent nurse, despite the eerie atmosphere. One night, I was assigned to care for Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who had been admitted for pneumonia. As I entered his room, I noticed he was staring intently at the corner of the room, his eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right?" I asked, trying to hide my apprehension. He turned to me, his voice trembling. "There's a girl standing in the corner. She's been there for hours, just watching me." I glanced towards the corner, but saw nothing except shadows cast by the flickering light. "There's no one there, Mr. Thompson. It must be your imagination." But he shook his head vigorously. "No, she's real. She's been haunting me since I got here." I reassured him as best as I could, but his fear was palpable. Throughout the night, he would glance nervously at the corner, muttering about the ghostly girl. As the hours passed, an unsettling feeling crept over me. I couldn't shake the sensation that we were not alone in the room. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. As the clock struck midnight, I decided to check on Mr. Thompson again. But when I entered his room, he was no longer there. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the room, but he was nowhere to be found. Just then, a chilling breeze swept through the room, causing the hairs on the back of my neck to stand on end. I turned towards the corner and saw her, the ghostly girl that Mr. Thompson had spoken of. She was pale and translucent, her eyes hollow and empty. She stared at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to run, to flee from the room and never look back. But something held me in place. A morbid curiosity mingled with a sense of duty to my patient. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The ghostly girl tilted her head slightly, as if considering her response. Then, in a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of the grave, she spoke. "I am trapped here, cursed to wander these halls for eternity. But you can help me." Her words sent a chill coursing through my veins. "How can I help you?" She beckoned me closer, her spectral hand outstretched. "Find the locket. It holds the key to my freedom. Find it and set me free." I hesitated, unsure whether to trust the ghostly apparition before me. But something in her eyes, a desperation mingled with sorrow, compelled me to listen. "Where can I find the locket?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She pointed towards the hospital's abandoned wing, a place rumored to be haunted by restless spirits. With that, she vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, I ventured into the abandoned wing of the hospital. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, sending a shiver down my spine. As I made my way towards the attic, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering secrets long forgotten. Finally, I reached the attic and began my search. Boxes piled high with old medical equipment and yellowed patient records lined the walls, creating a maze of forgotten relics. But amidst the chaos, I spotted it, a small, tarnished locket nestled among the debris. With trembling hands, I reached out and grasped it, feeling its weight in my palm. As I held the locket, a sense of foreboding washed over me. I knew that by opening it, I would unleash forces beyond my comprehension. But I also knew that it was the only way to fulfill my promise to the ghostly girl. With a deep breath, I opened the locket, revealing a faded photograph inside. It was of a young girl, her face filled with innocence and joy. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the attic, sending me reeling backward. I looked up to see the ghostly girl standing before me, her form flickering in and out of existence. "You've done it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "You've set me free." As she spoke, a blinding light enveloped her, illuminating the attic in an otherworldly glow. And then, with a final wisp of smoke, she vanished into the ether, leaving behind only silence. I stood there, alone in the attic, the weight of what had just transpired settling over me. But amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was also a sense of peace, for I had helped a soul find redemption, and in doing so, had discovered a strength within myself that I never knew existed. My parents got divorced in 1997, and I was born in 1990, so I was 7 at the time. They stayed friends, but my mom moved out to my grandparents' old house. My grandparents had quite a lot of money and had recently moved without selling the house. So there was no problem for them to let my mother and us move into their old house. We ended up living there for about 5 years. It was me, my mother, and my 2 sisters who are a few years older than me, and our dog. The house had 3 floors. The ground floor, basement, and upper floor where me and my sisters slept. The basement was the most horrific place in the house. The stairs led from the basement up to the first floor, then to the second floor, like a spiral. And most of the steps would creak and make lots of sound when stepping on them. Several times a week, you would hear footsteps slowly walking from the basement up the stairs. taking a short break at the ground floor, and then moving to the second floor. Most of the time, the steps would stop at my older sister's room, but it would vary and sometimes stop outside my room or my middle sister's room. We all heard it. My mom did not like to talk about it, but my sisters and I often talked about it the day after and confirmed hearing it outside whatever room it stopped by. We all hated going down to the basement. It was a big, big basement that you would think children would enjoy playing in, but we hated it. Our dog never went down to the basement. She hated it just as much as us. All kinds of minor things happened down in the basement. The light would turn off randomly, things moved, and you could often hear stuff moving down there even though no one was down there. One evening, I and my sisters were playing with walkie-talkies, trying to get to the local police channel. This time, the voice in the walkie-talkie was different and sounded much closer. The voice said all kinds of things. It was speaking directly to my oldest sister and said that it was going to hurt her. It even spoke her name, but I don't think it ever answered our questions. We got scared and turned off the walkie-talkie. A minute or so later, our dog ran into our room and barked out into nothing. Our dog was large and protective of us kids and kept staying in the room, barking, which had never happened before or after. Another time, I and my mom were home, but my sisters and dog were away. I was playing up in my room and my mom was doing whatever moms do. Suddenly, I heard really loud footsteps from the basement, even though I was on the second floor in my room, walking, almost running up from the basement, then continuing up the stairs to the second floor. I remember my heart just stopped when listening to the footsteps. My mom never walks that heavy and angry. The footsteps continued until outside my room, then stopped and my door was slammed hard. The door closed and I screamed and cried. My mom raced up the stairs and tried to open the door, but she couldn't. It was as if the door was locked, though I don't think the door had a locking mechanism. My mom shouted to me to be calm while she ran down to get tools to tear the door down. While she was down, and 7-8-year-old I was crying, the door suddenly unlocked itself and opened. Another time when my sisters and my dog were away, there was a storm, and for some reason, I was deathly afraid of the thunder. I have never been afraid of thunder before or after, but this night I was, and in the basement, everything went crazy. We heard things thrown around down there, glass shattering, which we confirmed in the morning after that glass and stuff had been thrown around and shattered. Footsteps were running up and down the stairs, and my mother hugged each other, both scared of what we were hearing. At one time, we were sitting in the living room, just being deathly scared. The entrance door flew open, then closed, opened, and closed again for several minutes. It was a storm outside, and it was blowing, but this was not the storm. Many more minor things happened, but these are what came to my mind. It seemed to me that it got worse when my dog was not around, and it was more after my older sister. Last night I couldn't sleep at all, which is fairly normal since I work graveyard shifts and it's pretty much turned me into a night owl. So even on my days off, I'm usually up all night long. So I'm up in bed watching a rom-com, laughing and in a great mood, and decided that I deserve to treat myself to the occasional drink. My bar is in my basement, which is fully finished and furnished. It's pretty much a man cave. I've spent entire nights down there by myself or with the gang, and nothing strange has ever happened. So anything creepy or weird down there was the furthest thing from my mind. I finish laughing my butt off and head down there. I go behind the bar, pour myself a drink, and head upstairs. But as I'm on the second to last step to the first floor, from behind me I hear "Hey!" coming from downstairs in the middle of the basement. It was an older man's voice, in their 50s, I think. I know the house is empty except for me, and it scared me. I looked down there and nothing moved, no one spoke or came forward, and I freaked out. I jutted up the last 2 steps and slammed the basement door closed. I'm wondering, did I imagine that? Is there someone in my house? And as I stand there panicking, I hear the same man's voice coming from down in the basement, but muffled by the door. By the intonation, he asked a question, then continued to talk right after. He was talking to me. The question sounded something like, "Where are you going?" I couldn't make much out, especially what he said after that, but I was panicked, adrenaline pumping, and said, "This is scary, someone broke into my house." I ran into the next room, grabbed my flashlight and my handy-dandy baseball bat, and headed back down there. Silence, just silence. Slowly, I turned on every light in every room down there, ready to defend myself, but nothing. Every nook and corner was checked, and the basement was empty, except for me. I went down to the basement this afternoon, after I woke up, with my trusty bat in hand, and rechecked the whole place. I found nothing. No one. Just me questioning both my sanity and reality. I know what I heard. That guy was pretty loud, and he was talking in my direction and AT me. Even through the door, I heard him talking down there at me up the stairs. It seemed like he was trying to have a conversation with me. I've never had any kind of break-in. This is a very safe neighborhood, or any kind of remotely strange experience down there in my 15 years here. Does stuff like this happen to people out of the blue, or am I finally losing my mind? I don't know what to do now. It happened at 1:50 a.m. At this point, I believe it most likely was paranormal, and I think I'm going to go down there tonight to repeat the same process at the same time and see what happens. My curiosity's gotten the better of me, and I want to know what it has to say. If it's an intruder, I'm coming prepared this time, but it should still be very interesting. I've been down here from 1:45 a.m. until 3 a.m., walking around asking and looking, and nothing. Part of me feels like it needs the darkness, or even just that element of unpredictability to manifest. A couple of years ago, I was home alone. My husband was traveling out of state for work, leaving me to fend for myself in our quiet little house. It was one of those evenings where the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the darkness seemed to seep into every corner of the house. I decided to make myself some dinner and settled into the kitchen, the comforting aroma of spices and sizzling food filling the air. To keep myself company, I turned on the news on our Samsung Smart TV, propping the remote on the coffee table before heading back to the kitchen to attend to my cooking. After a few minutes of chopping vegetables and stirring pots, I realized that the sound of the news had vanished. Puzzled, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked back into the living room. To my surprise, the TV screen displayed a picture of a couch, but not just any couch, it was the one in our living room. Confusion gripped me as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How could the TV be showing a live video of our living room? I glanced around, searching for any signs of intrusion, but everything seemed undisturbed. The remotes were still lying innocently on the coffee table, untouched. A chill crept down my spine as I realized the gravity of the situation. Someone was watching me through our television. Panic welled up inside me, but I knew I had to act fast. With trembling hands, I reached for a roll of duct tape and covered the camera on the TV, hoping to cut off whoever's prying eyes were invading our home. For the next few days, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards and every flicker of the lights sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder how long we had been under surveillance before I discovered it. Then, one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, a news report caught my attention. The headline sent a shiver down my spine. Samsung Smart TVs vulnerable to hacking. My heart raced as I listened to the reporter detail the security flaw that allowed hackers to remotely access the cameras on certain models of Samsung Smart TVs. It was as if a cold hand had gripped my heart, squeezing it with fear. I glanced nervously at the TV in the living room, knowing that it had been our portal into the privacy of our home. How many times had someone watched us without our knowledge? The thought sent chills down my spine. From that day on, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every sound echoed with suspicion. I became hypervigilant, checking every corner of the house for signs of intrusion. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over our home. It was as if a dark cloud hung over us, casting a shadow over our once peaceful existence. Then one night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere in the house. My heart skipped a beat as I strained my ears, listening intently for any sign of movement. The scratching grew louder, more insistent until it seemed to fill the entire house. Panic seized me as I realized that whatever was making that sound was getting closer, inching its way toward me with each passing moment. With trembling hands, I reached for the phone on the bedside table, ready to call for help. But before I could dial a number, the scratching stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to echo through the darkness. I lay frozen in bed, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for anything to happen. But the house remained still, as if holding its breath, waiting for whatever was out there to make its next move. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the scratching started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from outside the house. It was coming from the living room, from the very same TV that had been our unwitting gateway into the world of surveillance. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that the source of the scratching was not some unknown intruder, but something far more sinister. Something that had been lurking in the shadows of our own home all along. As the scratching grew louder and more frantic, I knew that whatever was on the other side of that TV was not human. It was something dark, something malevolent, something that had been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And as I lay there, paralyzed with fear, I knew that our nightmare was far from over. For in the darkness of the night, with no one to hear our cries for help, we were at the mercy of whatever lurked on the other side of that TV screen. It was a scary night. My parents had left earlier for a dinner party, leaving me home alone. Normally, I didn't mind being by myself, but tonight was different. Tonight, something felt off. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glowing numbers on my alarm clock. It was past midnight, and the darkness outside seemed to seep into every corner of the house. I wrapped myself tighter in my blanket, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the howling wind. My name, Tom, it called, drifting up from downstairs. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in terror. Who could be calling my name at this hour? My parents wouldn't be back for hours, and I didn't have any friends nearby. I strained my ears, listening intently for any other sounds. The house was eerily silent, except for the occasional creaks and groans of its aging structure. I hesitated, debating whether to investigate or stay put in the safety of my room. Curiosity and fear warred within me, but ultimately, curiosity won out. I had to know who or what was calling my name. With trembling hands, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed to my bedroom door. Peering into the dimly lit hallway, I took a deep breath and summoned all the courage I could muster. Slowly, I descended the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the silent house. The air grew colder with every step, sending shivers down my spine. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Tom," it called, sounding closer now, as if it was right around the corner. I swallowed hard, my throat dry with fear. Steeling myself, I rounded the corner and entered the living room. The room was bathed in darkness, illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. I squinted into the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a figure standing by the window, its silhouette stark against the moonlit backdrop. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached cautiously, my footsteps barely making a sound on the carpeted floor. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but I could feel its gaze boring into me, cold and unrelenting. With a trembling hand, I reached for the light switch, flicking it on in one swift motion. The room flooded with light, illuminating the figure before me. It was nothing, just a coat rack draped with my parents' coats, swaying gently in the breeze. I let out a shaky sigh of relief, feeling foolish for letting my imagination run wild. But then I heard it again, the whisper closer now, right behind me. "Tom," it hissed, sending chills down my spine. I whirled around, but there was nobody there. Just space and the faint sound of the wind outside. Panic seized me then, and I bolted for the front door, desperate to escape whatever unseen presence haunted our house. But as I reached for the doorknob, a cold hand gripped my shoulder, sending shockwaves of terror through my body. I spun around to face my attacker, but there was nobody there. Just an empty hallway, stretching out before me like a corridor of nightmares. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as I tried to flee. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from the darkness. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, primal and full of menace. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I backed away from the unseen threat. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the growling stopped. The house fell silent once more, the only sound the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I stood there, frozen in terror, unsure of what to do next. But then I remembered, the phone. I had to call for help. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my cell phone, dialing my parents' number with shaking fingers. But as the phone rang on the other end, I realized something chilling. The voice that answered was not my mother's or father's. It was the voice from downstairs, the one that had been calling my name all along. "Tom," it whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. "You shouldn't have come looking for me, Tom. Now you're mine." And with that, the line went dead, leaving me alone in the darkness with whatever unseen horror lurked in the shadows. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face as I realized the truth. I was not alone in the house, and whatever was with me, it was hungry for more than just my name.